Humanity had always believed in the unity of the galaxy. For centuries, Earth had been a small but proud member of the Galactic Council, a vast alliance of races that spanned across countless worlds. Earth had always struggled to keep up, but they had a spirit unlike any other species. They had their ingenuity, their adaptability, and most importantly, their will to survive. No matter what the universe threw at them, humans always found a way to endure. But all of that changed in an instant. It started with a simple message, delivered in a tone that made every human in the galaxy stop in their tracks. The Galactic Council, once their protectors, had made a decision that would alter the course of humanity forever. They would abandon Earth. The message was cold, calculated, and utterly heartless. The galaxy no longer saw humanity as a valuable ally. They were a threat. Too unpredictable, too dangerous. The Council declared that Earth would be cut off, isolated, and left to fend for itself. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a death sentence. As Earth watched its connection to the stars severed, panic spread through every city, every government. What could they do? The greatest minds of humanity scrambled for answers, but nothing prepared them for this. The galaxy had turned its back on them. They were no longer a part of the Grand Alliance. They were nothing. The darkness of space, which once seemed so vast and beautiful, now felt suffocating. Earth was alone. Humanity was isolated in the vast expanse. No allies, no friends. Just the cold vacuum of space staring back at them. But even in that darkness, humans didn't break. They didn't surrender. They would survive. As Earth's leaders tried to rally their people, a quiet sense of hopelessness began to creep in. There was no one to turn to, no one to help. The humans on Earth could only look to the stars, wondering if they would ever see the light of another civilization again. But even in the darkest times, something unexpected happened. A small signal, faint but clear, began to pulse through the void. It was unlike anything Earth had ever received. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't a message of friendship. No, it was something else. A warning, perhaps. A promise. The humans on Earth weren't sure what it was, but they knew one thing for sure. It was a sign that they weren't completely alone. The signal was faint, too weak to decipher immediately, but it was there. The frequency was strange, not something the humans had ever encountered before, and yet it seemed to call to them, as if it were reaching out, waiting for them to follow. The message was simple, almost cryptic, but it was enough to spark hope in the hearts of those who heard it. Could this be their salvation? Or was it just another trap set by the galaxy to lead them further into despair? With nothing to lose, Earth's leaders decided to investigate. The message was their only chance. It was their only hope in this cold, unforgiving galaxy. They had to follow the signal, no matter where it led. They had no choice but to take the risk, for if they didn't, they would be left in the void forever. As a fleet of ships began to mobilize, ready to track down the mysterious signal, the entire planet held its breath. What lay beyond the stars? What awaited them on the other side of this message? Was it an enemy, or was it something even more terrifying? The humans had no idea, but one thing was clear. They would never know unless they took that first step. And so, Earth's fleet, small and vulnerable, set out into the darkness of space. They knew the galaxy had abandoned them, but they didn't care. They had no allies to rely on, no weapons to protect them. But they had something the galaxy had underestimated: their unbreakable will. The fleet ventured deeper into space, following the faint signal that had ignited their hopes. As they traveled farther from the safety of Earth, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. It was a one-way journey. There was no turning back. If they failed, they would disappear into the void, just another forgotten species. Hours turned into days, days into weeks. The crew aboard the ships felt the tension growing. What would they find? What awaited them in the depths of space? Each passing moment seemed to bring them closer to the unknown. The stars outside the ship windows appeared more distant, and the silence of space seemed to grow heavier. And then, Just when the crew began to feel like they were chasing a ghost, the signal grew stronger. The frequency became clearer, louder. It was no longer just a faint whisper in the dark. It was real. It was out there. But what was it? The tension on the ships was palpable. The humans were about to encounter something that could either save them or destroy them. Their hearts raced as the signal led them closer and closer to the source. The fleet was nearing its destination, and Earth was holding its breath. Would this be the beginning of humanity's rise, or would it be the final chapter in their story? As the ships closed in on the signal's origin, no one knew what to expect. All they knew was that their fate, their future, depended on what they found next. The fleet moved cautiously, each ship following the trail of the mysterious signal. The closer they got, the more the atmosphere on board seemed to thicken. Tension was heavy, and even the most experienced crew members couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping over them. They were venturing into the unknown, guided by a signal whose source was still a complete mystery. As they approached the coordinates, a vast, dark object loomed before them. It wasn't a planet, nor was it a moon. It was something far more intriguing, a massive, ancient structure, floating silently in the void of space. It was impossible to tell how old it was, but it radiated a sense of eerie power, as if it had been waiting for something, waiting for them. The signal, now clearer than ever, seemed to pulse from within the structure, drawing the ships closer. Its frequency had changed subtly, almost as if it were calling to them, urging them to approach. Every captain aboard the fleet felt a strange compulsion to go closer, to see what was hidden within the dark shell of this massive object. As the fleet drifted into position around the structure, their sensors began to pick up faint readings. At first, there was nothing of any significance, just the usual background radiation and cosmic noise. But as they began scanning deeper, something unexpected appeared. The readings were like nothing they had ever encountered. There was energy, immense amounts of it, locked inside the structure. It was concentrated, powerful, and far beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of building. The readings fluctuated, and for a moment, the fleet's sensors blinked out entirely. The ships shook, and the crew braced themselves as the massive structure seemed to respond to their presence. "Get ready," Captain Mendez, the leader of the fleet, said into the comms. His voice was steady, but even he couldn't hide the underlying tension. This could be our chance to understand what's out there, or it could be the end of us. The crew aboard the flagship, the Endurance, exchanged nervous glances. They knew that the fate of humanity rested on this moment. If they failed to understand what this object was, or worse, if it was hostile, Earth's last hope would be lost forever. The structure's surface began to shift. At first, it was subtle, like the hull of a ship adjusting to the pressure of space. Then, as the fleet drew closer, more dramatic changes began to take place. Huge sections of the structure slowly slid open, revealing deep, glowing chambers within. The energy readings surged, and the ship's systems flickered as they tried to process the unknown technology. "It's alive," one of the engineers muttered, wide-eyed, watching the data come in. "Alive," Captain Mendez repeated, turning towards the engineer. "What do you mean by that?" The engineer pointed at the readings. "The structure is moving. It's like it's reacting to us, almost like it's alive." The fleet hovered in awe, the mysterious structure now fully exposed to their view. It was impossible to tell how large it truly was, as the surrounding space was filled with the glowing lights and energy pulses that seemed to emanate from the heart of the object. It felt like the universe itself had opened a door, and humanity was standing at the threshold. As the fleet held position, a new signal began to emerge. This one was different. It wasn't the faint call they had followed. It was a direct communication, a series of complex patterns that the ship's translators struggled to decode. "Prepare for possible contact," Captain Mendez ordered, his voice tight with anticipation. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something monumental, something that could change everything. The new signal seemed to be speaking directly to them, But the language was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was alien, yes, but there was an underlying familiarity in the rhythm of it, something that resonated deeply within each of the humans on board. Suddenly, the signal stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Aboard the fleet's ships, everyone felt it, the weight of the moment. They had traveled so far, endured so much, and now it felt as though they were at the mercy of whatever awaited them inside this vast, ancient structure. But then, without warning, the structure's surface began to ripple. A massive energy surge erupted from within, lighting up the entire fleet's viewports with a blinding flash of light. For a moment, nothing was visible but pure white brilliance. The ship's systems screamed in alarm, and the crew had to shield their eyes from the intense light. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the light faded. The fleet was still intact, but the object in front of them was now silent, completely still. "Did you see that?" one of the crew members whispered, staring out at the now motionless structure. "What just happened?" Captain Mendez stood still for a moment, staring at the now quiet object. He had no answers. All he knew was that the structure had just revealed something, a power, a force that humans had never imagined. But the question still remained. What did this all mean? Why had the structure reacted? Was it a message, a warning? Or had they been wrong all along in thinking that this was a place of salvation? "Something's about to happen," Mendez muttered under his breath. "And when it does, it will change everything." The crew aboard the fleet's ships couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Even the most hardened officers felt the weight of unseen eyes tracking their every move. As they hovered around the ancient structure, it remained eerily silent, as though the ship had gone into a deep slumber. Yet the energy readings were still off the charts, pulsing faintly, like the heartbeat of some immense creature. Captain Mendez stood on the bridge of the Endurance, staring out into the vast emptiness. The structure was colossal, stretching far beyond what the sensors could measure. The surface glowed softly, as if alive with untold power, and the atmosphere was heavy with the tension of the unknown. "What do we do now?" asked Lieutenant Hall, one of the young officers, his voice quivering with a mix of fear and curiosity. "It's not responding to us, Captain. It feels wrong." "I know," Mendez replied, eyes narrowing as he analyzed the stillness of the structure. "But we're not leaving here without answers. This is our chance to learn what's out there, what has been out there all this time." The fleet's engineers and scientists were working around the clock, trying to decode the signals they had intercepted from the object. But despite their best efforts, the transmission seemed to grow more complex by the hour. There was no clear pattern, no identifiable language, just an overwhelming sense of ancient, boundless intelligence, making every attempt to communicate seem futile. Then a new signal emerged, different from the ones they had been receiving. This time, it wasn't just a pattern. It was a direct message, one that seemed to speak to them in a language of light and sound. It wasn't anything they could understand, but the clarity of it made every crew member feel something deep within, a strange, primal response. The ship's communication officer, Ensign Rivera, turned toward Mendez, her face pale. "Captain, you need to see this." The message was being displayed on the bridge's holographic screen. It was not in any language they knew. No written words. Instead, it appeared as symbols, shifting patterns of light, glowing pulses, and strange geometric shapes, shifting and merging in a way that felt almost alive. "What is this?" Mendez whispered, feeling the air in the room grow thick, the walls seeming to close in. "It's not just a message," Ensign Rivera said, trembling slightly. "It's a call. It's inviting us in." Captain Mendez's eyes narrowed. Inviting us in. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Could this be a trap? A trick? They had already seen one unsettling display when the structure lit up in an explosion of power, only to fall silent afterward. Now this invitation. But who was inviting them? And why? "Open a direct communication channel," Mendez ordered, his voice steady, though his mind raced. "Let's see what happens." There was a moment of hesitation, a deep breath held in unison across the fleet, before Rivera nodded and began her work. She activated the channel, and for a brief moment, everything was quiet. Then the message came again, this time even clearer. The symbols flashed faster, overlapping in a dizzying array of patterns. They twisted and turned, almost as if they were beckoning to the humans. Mendez was transfixed by the patterns. They were beautiful, in a strange, unsettling way. He could feel something stirring deep within him, an urge to understand, to unlock what was hidden behind these glowing images. "This is it," Mendez said, more to himself than anyone else. "This is the key, but we need to decode it. Fast." The rest of the fleet fell into action. Scientists and analysts across the ship scrambled to make sense of the code, but even as they worked, something was beginning to shift. The structure, which had remained motionless for so long, began to hum again. Low at first, like a distant rumble, but growing louder and louder as the energy level surged. It wasn't just the structure that was reacting. The space around it seemed to warp, the stars themselves dimming in response to the energy flowing from the object. The fabric of reality seemed to bend, as though something ancient was stirring from its slumber. "What is happening?" Lieutenant Hall asked, his voice rising in panic. "The energy readings are going off the charts again. The ship's systems can't handle this. We need to back off." Ensign Rivera shouted, her hands flying over the controls. But it was too late. The energy buildup was already too much for the fleet's ships to escape. Then it happened. A brilliant flash of light erupted from the structure, blinding everyone on board. The ships shook violently, their hulls groaning as they struggled to stay intact. Systems went down. Communication lines broke. The once clear view of the structure was replaced by a blinding, radiant glow. For a moment, the crew was lost in chaos. The flash seemed to last forever, and the ships rocked from side to side, caught in the energy surge. Mendez grabbed hold of the console as the lights flickered and alarms blared. When the light finally faded, the ships were no longer in the same place. The Endurance drifted through the vast emptiness, surrounded by unfamiliar stars. The structure that had once loomed in front of them was gone. No trace, no sign that it had ever been there. And yet, the mysterious signal remained. The ship's systems slowly came back online, flickering into life one by one. The crew, dazed but alive, looked at each other in confusion. Where had they gone? What had just happened? Mendez stood slowly, his mind racing. The fleet had been moved, somehow, somewhere else, and as he stared into the black void ahead, he knew one thing for certain. They were no longer in the same galaxy. They had crossed into something new, something far beyond their understanding. The real journey was just beginning. The ships floated in the eerie silence of a new and unknown galaxy. Captain Mendez stood at the helm of the Endurance, his eyes scanning the star-filled expanse before them. The vastness of space felt different now, darker and more mysterious. No longer could they rely on the familiar coordinates or stellar maps they had once trusted. The galaxy they had known was no longer within their reach. "Where are we?" Lieutenant Hall asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He stood beside Mendez, eyes fixed on the unfamiliar stars. This isn't our galaxy." "We're not sure yet," Mendez replied, his voice steady, but his mind was far from calm. "But I've got a feeling we're not alone out here. Whatever happened back there with the structure, it wasn't just an accident. It brought us here for a reason." A deep shiver ran through the ship as the crew tried to make sense of their new reality. The energy readings continued to fluctuate. Their instruments told them they were still in space, but the stars they saw before them were unlike any they had cataloged. The colors were wrong, the constellations unfamiliar. Every system they had relied on had become useless. Then, without warning, a signal began to ping on the communication system, a soft, rhythmic beat, like a distant drum. It was the same pattern as before, but now it was stronger, more insistent. This time, there was no denying it. Something, or someone, was trying to reach them. Mendez motioned for Rivera, the communications officer, to take action. "Open the channel, Ensign. Let's see if we can talk to whoever or whatever is sending that signal." A few moments passed before Rivera spoke up. "Captain, it's not in any language we know. It's like it's being broadcast in sound and light at the same time. But we can't translate it." Mendez's eyes narrowed. "That's not good enough. We need to make contact. Try to amplify the signal." Rivera hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. "I'm doing it now. But Captain, I think this signal is coming from a massive object, not far from here. It's enormous, bigger than any ship we've ever seen." "Set a course," Mendez ordered, his heart beginning to race. "We need to investigate. Whatever's out there might have the answers we're looking for." The fleet shifted its course, slowly edging toward the source of the signal. As they approached, the object came into view, a massive, derelict ship, unlike anything the humans had ever encountered. It was not a ship in the traditional sense. It looked more like a colossal structure, resembling an ancient, half-destroyed city floating in space. Jagged edges and crumbling spires stretched out across its surface, with strange symbols and markings running along its hull. The entire ship radiated an ominous aura, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. "It's enormous," Lieutenant Hall muttered, his voice full of disbelief. "What could have built something like that?" Mendez studied the object closely. "Whatever it is, it's ancient, older than anything we've ever encountered. We need to approach cautiously." As the fleet neared the derelict ship, the signals grew stronger, more urgent. It was as if the ship itself was calling out to them, drawing them in. The crew couldn't explain it, but there was an overwhelming sense of destiny pulling them closer to the unknown. "Captain," Rivera said, her voice trembling, "I think we're being welcomed." "Welcomed?" Mendez echoed, not understanding what she meant. But as he glanced at the glowing lights on the ship's hull, he felt it too, an invitation, pulling them closer. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel as they neared the massive ship. The stars outside seemed to dim, their light fading in the presence of this ancient construct. The ship was alive with energy, its surface humming as though it were a sentient being. There were no signs of life, no crew, no inhabitants, only the eerie hum of machinery long forgotten. "We're in range," Rivera said, her hands shaking as she checked the ship's systems. "Captain, there's something inside the ship, something moving." Mendez's heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure?" "Yes, Captain," Rivera confirmed, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "I can't explain it, but there's something alive in there." A tense silence fell over the crew. The idea of venturing into an ancient, abandoned ship, a relic of a civilization long past, was daunting. But the call they had felt earlier, the magnetic pull of the unknown, was undeniable. It was as if the ship itself had chosen them. It had drawn them here. And now they had to answer. "Prepare a landing team," Mendez ordered, his voice steady, but with an edge of uncertainty. "We're going in. Whatever's inside, we need to find out what it is. And we need to be ready for anything." The team gathered their gear, scanners, weapons, and communications equipment. They would board the derelict ship in search of answers, but with every step, the tension only grew. The feeling of being watched was palpable, and as they set foot on the broken hull of the ship, they felt the eerie presence of something ancient and powerful. Inside the ship, the air was cold, and the hallways were long and narrow, lined with strange markings and symbols. The crew moved cautiously, the silence almost deafening as their footsteps echoed through the deserted corridors. It was as if the ship had once been alive with activity, but now it had been left to rot in the dark of space. And yet, something moved in the shadows, a flicker of light, a whisper in the darkness. The crew paused, their eyes scanning every corner. "Did you hear that?" Lieutenant Hall asked, his voice tight with fear. Before Mendez could respond, a loud mechanical noise filled the air. The walls seemed to vibrate. The ship, this relic of an ancient civilization, was coming back to life. And it was waiting for them. As the crew of the Endurance made their way through the dark corridors of the massive ship, a sense of dread settled over them. The air was cold, unnaturally so, as though the ship had been abandoned for centuries. The walls were covered in strange symbols, etched into the surface with what appeared to be glowing lines of energy, flickering like dim stars in a forgotten galaxy. There was no sound, no sign of life, only the hum of the ship's machinery. An eerie reminder that they were intruding on something ancient, something that was waiting. Captain Mendez led the way, his hand resting on the pulse rifle slung over his shoulder. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger with every step. The crew followed closely behind, their boots echoing on the metallic floor, their breath visible in the cold air. Suddenly, Rivera, the communications officer, held up a hand. "Captain," she whispered, her voice tense. "I'm picking up something. It's a transmission. Not a signal this time. Something live, like speech." Mendez's heart skipped a beat. "What language?" he asked. I don't know," Rivera replied, her brow furrowed in confusion. "It's like it's trying to speak, but it's not anything we've ever encountered." They paused in the corridor, trying to make sense of the strange sounds filtering through the ship's communications system. The voices, if they could be called that, were low and guttural, overlapping in a rhythmic pattern. It sounded almost like a chant, a call from deep within the ship. "Are we getting closer to the source?" Mendez asked. Rivera checked the readings on her console. "Yes, Captain. The signal is strongest ahead. We're almost there." Mendez nodded. "Let's move." The crew pressed on, their pace quickening as the feeling of being drawn towards something intensified. The ship seemed to guide them, its massive corridors leading them deeper into its core, and the chanting grew louder, more insistent. They turned a corner, and suddenly, the darkness gave way to a vast chamber, lit by eerie, floating lights that hovered in midair like will-o'-the-wisps. At the center of the chamber stood a massive structure, towering and cylindrical, surrounded by complex machinery that hummed with power. The structure seemed to pulse with an energy that made the air crackle. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. A towering monolith, ancient and incomprehensible. In front of the structure stood an imposing figure. It was humanoid in shape, but covered in intricate armor that gleamed under the soft light. The figure didn't move, its back turned to the crew as if it were waiting for them. The chanting grew louder, now unmistakably coming from this figure, as if it were the source of the transmission. Mendez stepped forward cautiously, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon, though he knew it wouldn't be enough. This wasn't just any enemy. This was something far older, far more powerful. The figure's head slowly turned, and for the first time, the crew saw its face, or what might have been a face. It was an intricately designed mask, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. There was no mouth, no way to communicate in the traditional sense, but somehow Mendez could feel its gaze on him. "Who are you?" Mendez asked, his voice steady, though his heart raced in his chest. The figure didn't respond in words. Instead, the air seemed to hum around them, and the chanting grew louder, almost deafening. The crew could feel the vibrations in their bones, the very walls of the ship shaking as if it were alive, reacting to their presence. Suddenly, the figure raised a hand, and a burst of energy shot from its fingers, striking the walls and causing a massive explosion. The crew staggered back, barely able to maintain their footing. Sparks flew, and debris rained down from the ceiling, but the figure remained unharmed, standing as if nothing had happened. The crew fired back instinctively, their weapons lighting up the room, but the energy didn't seem to affect the figure. It wasn't just powerful, it was otherworldly. "Captain," Rivera shouted, her voice tinged with panic. "We can't hurt it. It's not like anything we've ever faced." Mendez didn't respond at first. He was too focused on the figure, trying to understand what it was. The energy from the figure's hand had caused the ship's entire core to pulse with power. It wasn't attacking them. It was testing them, measuring their response. The figure lowered its hand, and the chamber fell silent. For a moment, it seemed like time had stopped. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room, and the hum of the ship's machinery subsided into a tense stillness. Then the figure spoke, its voice not heard through the air, but directly in their minds. "You are not what I expected." The words echoed in their minds, and the crew froze, unable to move or speak. Mendez swallowed hard. "Who are you?" he asked again, though now it felt almost futile. "What is this place?" The figure's voice answered, cold and detached. "I am the Guardian. This place is my domain. And you, humans, are the key." The crew exchanged confused glances, trying to understand what it meant. They had come here seeking answers, but now they were faced with more questions than ever before. The Guardian continued, its presence overwhelming. "You were not meant to survive. You were not meant to leave your world. And yet, here you are, on the brink of awakening something that should never have been disturbed." Mendez felt a chill run down his spine. The Guardian's words seemed to carry the weight of ages, of knowledge that spanned beyond the stars. It knew them, knew their past, their struggles, and their survival against all odds. But what did it mean? And what was the Guardian trying to tell them? The tension in the air was palpable as the figure's glowing eyes fixed on Mendez. "You must choose," it said, its voice a whisper in their minds. "Your survival will change everything. But at what cost?" As the words echoed in the chamber, the crew knew one thing for certain. They were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. And their actions in the coming moments would decide the fate of humanity and the galaxy itself. The chamber grew colder. The Guardian's presence seemed to press down on them like a physical weight, each word it spoke leaving a trail of unease in its wake. The crew was trapped in a web of unknowns, and every second felt like an eternity. Mendez's mind raced, the implications of the Guardian's words unraveling in his thoughts. "Your survival will change everything. But at what cost?" The question echoed in his mind like a drumbeat, drowning out everything else. What did it mean? What was the cost? And what exactly was this awakening the Guardian had mentioned? Mendez took a step forward, his voice firm, but tinged with uncertainty. "What do you want from us?" The Guardian tilted its head slightly, the glowing eyes never leaving Mendez. "I want nothing," it replied, the words resonating directly in their minds, as if the figure's thoughts were somehow transmitted to them. "I have watched the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Yours is the most unexpected, the most dangerous." Dangerous. The words stuck with Mendez. They had always been underestimated, dismissed as weak, fragile, and unworthy of survival in the harsh expanse of the galaxy. And yet, here they were, standing in the heart of an ancient ship, facing a being whose very presence bent the laws of nature itself. "Why us?" Mendez asked. "Why are we the ones who survived?" The Guardian did not answer immediately. Instead, it turned its attention to the rest of the crew. They stood in silence, each of them aware that their fate was tied to Mendez's words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Guardian spoke again. "You were exiled, abandoned by the galaxy, left to perish in the darkness. But you did not perish. Instead, you adapted. You learned. You grew stronger." The voice seemed to hold a hint of admiration. "No other species could have done what you have done. You are the key to something far greater than you can comprehend. The galaxy will never be the same once you unlock it." A chill ran through Mendez's spine. "Unlock what?" The Guardian's eyes flickered, the glow in them pulsing in time with the strange hum of the ship. "The power of the Forgotten Ones. The words sent a shiver through the entire crew. Forgotten ones. What was this ancient power the Guardian was referring to? And how did it relate to humanity? Rivera, unable to hold back her questions any longer, stepped forward. What do you mean? What is this power? And why haven't we heard of it before? The Guardian seemed to regard Rivera for a long moment, its expression unreadable. Then, in a voice that sounded almost sad, it said, "Because you were not meant to remember. You were meant to fade into nothingness, a forgotten chapter in the galaxy's history. But you have awoken something within this ship, something that should have remained buried forever." Mendez's mind raced. What had they done? What had they awakened? "We didn't know," he said quietly, more to himself than to the Guardian. "We didn't know any of this. We just wanted to survive." The Guardian's voice softened. "Survival is your strength, human, but it is also your curse." Mendez looked at his crew. They were all silent, each one lost in their thoughts. He could see the fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else. Resolve. They had always fought for survival. They had always found a way to push forward. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. Mendez turned back to the Guardian. "What do we have to do? How do we unlock this power?" The Guardian's response was simple, but it carried the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. "You must make a choice that will shape the future of your people." The room fell into a tense silence. The crew looked at one another, each of them trying to comprehend the gravity of what was being asked of them. Mendez could feel the pressure building, the weight of the galaxy itself bearing down on him. "You'll have to choose. Accept the power and the responsibility that comes with it. Become more than what you are, or refuse it, and watch everything you fought for crumble to dust." The Guardian's voice was soft but unwavering. "You are no longer mere survivors. You are the inheritors of a legacy, and your decision will determine whether that legacy saves or destroys you." Mendez's heart raced. The choice was theirs, but the consequences were unknown. Could they afford to take such power? Could they trust it? And if they rejected it, would the galaxy destroy them anyway? The stakes had never been higher. "The power is within you," the Guardian continued, "but you must unlock it. I cannot help you. I can only offer you the chance to decide your fate. The awakening has begun, and now you must choose whether you will control it or be consumed by it." The tension in the room was unbearable. Every crew member knew that the moment had come, the moment that would determine their future. Mendez's hands were shaking as he looked at the Guardian. He had never felt so uncertain in his life. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We choose to fight. We choose to survive. And whatever comes after that, we'll deal with it." The Guardian's eyes flared with an intense glow. "So it begins." Suddenly, the ship seemed to come alive. The walls hummed with energy, and the chamber shifted, the floor beneath them vibrating. The crew braced themselves as the ship's lights blazed to life, revealing even more of the structure. They could feel the power coursing through the air, a raw, unfiltered force that made their skin tingle. It was happening. The awakening was in motion. But was it too late to turn back? Would humanity rise to become a force that could reshape the galaxy, or would they be consumed by the very power they sought to wield? The crew stood together, knowing that the path they had chosen could either lead to their salvation or to their doom. And as the ship's engines roared to life, they realized one undeniable truth. They were no longer just humans. They were something more. And they would change the galaxy forever. The decision had been made. Humanity had chosen to embrace the unknown, to seize the power hidden deep within the ship and unlock the secrets of the forgotten ones. The weight of their choice hung heavily in the air, each member of the crew feeling the responsibility pressing down on them. But there was no turning back now. The awakening had begun. The ship trembled around them, the walls humming with an energy so intense it felt as though the very fabric of space was bending. The lights flared brighter, and the entire vessel seemed to pulse with life. It was as if the ship itself had been waiting for this moment, and now, with the crew's decision, it had come alive. Mendez could feel the power stirring within the ship, a strange warmth radiating from the floor beneath him. It was as if the ship was alive, responding to their will, to the choices they had made. But with this power came uncertainty. What were the consequences of unlocking something so ancient, so powerful? Was it truly humanity's salvation, or would they be swallowed by it? The Guardian stood silently, watching the crew as the ship's transformation continued. Its glowing eyes seemed to grow even brighter, reflecting the surge of energy now coursing through the vessel. "You have made your choice," the Guardian said softly, its voice resonating through their minds. "Now you must learn to control what you have awakened. The power is yours, but it will not be tamed easily." Mendez took a deep breath. The fear, the uncertainty, was still there. But there was something else now, something stronger: hope. They had chosen to fight, to rise above the darkness that had threatened to consume them. They had chosen to become more than survivors. Now they had to prove that they were worthy of the power they had unlocked. "We will learn," Mendez said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "We will control it." The Guardian's eyes flickered, a faint smile, or something like it, appearing on its ancient face. "We shall see. The awakening is not just about power, it is about understanding. And that is something you will have to earn." The ship's hum grew louder, more intense, as if it were preparing for something monumental. Suddenly, a series of metallic clanks echoed throughout the chamber, followed by a loud grinding sound. The walls around them began to shift, revealing hidden compartments and ancient technology that had been sealed away for eons. The ship was revealing its secrets, and humanity was at the center of it all. The crew stood in awe as the ship continued to change, its true form coming to life before their eyes. The chamber they stood in expanded, revealing a vast control center, its consoles and terminals glowing with strange symbols and markings. The power that had been dormant for so long was now at their fingertips, but with it came the realization that they were no longer in control of their fate. The ship, and the ancient forces it housed, had its own agenda. "Are we ready for this?" Rivera whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. "What if we're not strong enough?" Mendez didn't answer immediately. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, but he also felt something else. A surge of determination. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. "We have no choice," Mendez said finally. "We have to be." The crew moved forward, each one drawn to the strange energy that filled the room. They gathered around the central console, their hands trembling as they reached out to touch the controls. The symbols on the screen shifted, rearranging themselves into patterns that seemed to communicate something deeper, something beyond their understanding. As Mendez placed his hand on the console, the energy surged through him, filling him with an overwhelming sense of power. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. He could feel the raw, untamed force of the ship coursing through his veins. It was like nothing he had ever experienced before. It was as if the very laws of nature were being rewritten around him. And then, in an instant, the ship's systems powered up, a blinding light filling the chamber as the energy reached its peak. The ship seemed to shake, its very core vibrating with the intensity of the power it now held. The crew stumbled back, their hands instinctively going to their ears as the sound of the ship's awakening filled the air like a thunderclap. Mendez's vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt as though he was losing himself in the power of the ship. He could hear the voices of his crew, but they sounded distant, as if they were calling from far away. The force was overwhelming, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he could hold on. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the light and sound faded, leaving behind a deep, unsettling silence. Mendez opened his eyes, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The ship had transformed, but it was different now, more than just a vessel. It was alive in a way that defied understanding. The crew stood in stunned silence, each of them processing what had just happened. The ship had unlocked its power, But now they had to face the consequences. The awakening had not been without cost. They could feel it in the air, the tension, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Mendez took a step forward, his voice steady but uncertain. What now? The Guardian's presence filled the room once more, its voice resonating in their minds. Now you must learn to wield the power you have awakened. The galaxy will soon learn of your rise, and they will not stand idly by. A chill ran down Mendez's spine. The awakening had begun, but the true challenge was only just beginning. The galaxy would come for them, and they would have to face whatever dangers lay ahead. But one thing was certain: humanity had changed, and nothing would ever be the same again.